Hey y'all, Craig. Oh man, I guess good things come to those who wait. Yeah, wow, a lot of news now. Where to even begin? I mean, the craziest stuff we've been hearing ends up being true. What do I mean? Well, for instance, this whole Sidney Powell and the Kraken thing. Who had any idea that, stuff was this deep? But, well, evidently a lot of people. Because there's even been books written on this stuff that came out as late as September. People have really known about all of these bizarre goings-ons around elections and computer manipulation for a long time, This stuff's been around for, at least 15 years, really more than that, coming out of Venezuela. A voting system manufactured to give the owner the ability to choose who wins. And of course, the owner is almost always, the person in power. And I just heard, just 20 minutes ago, that perhaps China has purchased our Dominion voting machine company. They've cleared out of their office space up in Canada, and I think in Colorado as well. The one head sales guy that was Antifa related and all has disappeared. And, evidently, a lot of people have been disappearing. So let me not get too far ahead of myself. Let's go over, what's going on with this election. Does Trump have a chance? I would say, yeah, Trump's got a really good chance. So let's talk about quickly what's going on. This is being fought from multiple fronts. It's a little chilly in South Carolina today. My lips are still frozen from cleaning the kennel. First is the stuff that we're all familiar with. Rudy Giuliani and all this kind of ballot stuffing, typical vote fraud, but much bigger than we're accustomed to seeing. And maybe it's been like this for a long time, but no one's really brought it to light like this. Now, it's interesting, going back, there's a record of this kind of fraud, of course, but now we're starting to get a kind of a feel for how this Dominion voting system figures into it all. And so, they would typically use it selectively. Like, maybe they used it in Florida a couple years ago, or maybe even, 10 years ago. I don't know. It seems like it's been used here and there to adjust things, in battleground states. And, I've mentioned before that it was probably used against Bernie, and who knows who else. But that's kind of, again, I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's talk about the basic stuff. Of course, a lot more dead people voting than you would expect. A lot more people voting in two places. A lot of people that have just moved away voting. Stuff that, is illegal. And oddly enough, we're seeing more and more reports of people being reached on phone who had requested an absentee ballot. And once they're reached, and you can imagine how tough that is. Who even answers a phone anymore, especially if it's not a number you've heard. But enough people have answered and basically said, yeah, and I did not request a ballot. But yet, they're marked down as requesting a ballot. Or a lot of people who have sent their ballot in, but it wasn't registered as being sent in. Or ballots just being received by who knows who, right? Where you have to leave your ballot outside in this collection area, and then eventually it'll make its way to be counted. But what you're seeing is the chain of custody is not really noted, so it could be anybody. Anybody could be picking up the ballots and taking them to wherever and pulling them out and changing them around. You know, that's probably the biggest issue, is the chain of custody, where you just didn't have enough eyeballs on the vote to know whether or not they're fraudulent. So, you know, that's basically what Giuliani is working on, is the stuff that we're kind of familiar with. You know, where did all these ballots come from? How come we suddenly had this big drop in the middle of the night? You know, how come we're getting reports of people seeing maybe thousands of ballots with the same signature, you know, and just one of the bubbles filled in for Joe Biden? You know, these strange anomalies. These aren't amazing. You know, when you hear, well, there's a few of these here and a few of these there, but you know, to make it even more complicated, they're doing these recounts, and you know, they keep coming up with basically the same number, and that shouldn't be a huge surprise because they're using the machines to do the counting. So, you know, the same machines that were controlled to miscount the first time. Now we know that, you know, a lot of ballots were manufactured somewhere else. It's being said that they were manufactured in China. I know that there were a lot of seizures of stuff like fake IDs and stuff like that prior to the election. I know that there were a lot of different consulates, Chinese consulates, that were raided. That there were a lot of spies inside those consulates that were deported. So that may indicate, you know, that they were onto this a long time ago. But I think part of what we're seeing is, I think people were grabbed prior to all of this and basically were flipped, told that basically that this is treasonous and the penalty can be death. And if you'd like to avoid that, you need to work with us so we can solve this crime. I suspect that's what's been happening, because so many of these things have been isolated and identified. And they're all happening in the places where you would expect them to happen. You know, and like I said, I mean, books were written about this. Years ago, we had Democrats complaining about the same voting system and the same kinds of fraud. We know that Jimmy Carter and a whole commission had advised 15 years ago on what to do about securing the elections, not allowing this kind of fraud. And we know that those directions were completely ignored. Maybe they were instructions for this election, right? So it would appear, with the kind of news that we're getting now, that there are eyeballs on this, and there's expectation for all this fraud to take place. And so, you know, we've heard the stories about, you know, the watermark on the ballots, so that you can determine if it's a legitimate ballot or if it was printed in China or wherever. I haven't heard anything about that since. So maybe that's something that's there. But I know that no impartial party has put their hands on the ballots yet. And we're getting to that point. You know, we had to do the recounts, and those are automatic in a lot of states. If the margin's within 1%, there's going to be a recount. And of course, it was Trump's team's right to ask for a recount in Georgia. But you know, you're counting all the ballots each time, and the machines are doing most of the counting because you're talking about a lot of counting. So, you know, although you hear stuff like, oh, the machines crashed, and oh, they found, you know, this memory stick with a bunch of votes on it and stuff like that. This is all introducing some sort of hack. You know, these things don't just appear. I mean, they're put there to be found for things to happen. Or in this case, I don't think they just crashed, you know, and then they had the Dominion people rush in there to work on this. And of course, what they're trying to do is erase their steps. But again, I keep getting ahead of myself, but it's amazing stuff. I mean, if somebody were to write all this out in a spy novel, you'd be like, this is kind of implausible, right? You know, this is nuts, but here we are. So I'll get back to Giuliani, and you know, like I said, they've had all kinds of statisticians and people who, you know, white hat hackers and people like this who are trying to determine what happened and trying to find evidence of it. And there's just loads and loads of people. But the really heavy-duty evidence won't come out until these cases reach their ultimate point, which is the Supreme Court. And so we'll just hear little drips and drabs about it up until that point. So, what you're hearing, of course, in the mainstream press is that, well, they just keep losing each one of these cases. The judge won't hear it, or it's denied, and nothing's happening, and just accept Biden. But, boy, it couldn't be farther from the truth. Because what's really happening is that there's devastating evidence being laid out. You probably saw in Pennsylvania and in Georgia and Arizona, and it goes on and on. They just keep laying out the case, and although you don't see the hardcore evidence, it's too early for that. It's what you need to do at this point is establish that question. Is it possible? And I don't think there can be any doubt. You're seeing serious-minded people who understand that this is treasonous activity. If this were to actually happen, right? If one group actively set out to steal an election electronically and through a coordinated effort to manufacture ballots in multiple places and identify multiple places, these swing states where they could steal an election, basically, that's the kind of thing that you have to take that into its entirety. I mean, it's a coup attempt. We've called the process of trying to impeach Trump through the whole Russian collusion narrative and the Ukraine scandal and all that as a coup attempt, and really it was. I mean, they're trying to boot a president through fraudulent evidence who had won an election fair and square. And here we are again. It would seem to indicate that probably if all the votes were counted and all the illegal votes were taken away, Trump would win handedly. And it's being claimed now that even if they left the fraudulent ballots in place, but disconnected the Dominion machines and all of the counting machines from the internet and from anyone else's interference, that even with the fake ballots, Biden would lose. And that's amazing because, with the votes that they allowed Trump to have, it's 10 million more than the first time he was elected. So just imagine if what everyone is saying to be true is true. It was a lot more than that. I mean, what that means is that there's probably at least 80 million people in this country who voted for Trump and who are probably pretty upset right now. So anyway, like I was saying, the case is being made. Rudy's taking it through the traditional course, through the courts, and what he's doing is he's working his way up from the lower courts. You have to work your way up to the Supreme Court. And so even when you see a judge dismiss it, it's like, oh, well, that's a Trump-appointed judge, and he just dismissed this case. Well, the idea is to help elevate it, get it up there to the Supreme Court, because there's no point in showing your cards to the lower-level court to where the press can try to just, minimize this stuff as hard as they can, because, I mean, make no mistake, right? We know that the press is in the pocket of the left. We've seen it. We've seen how nasty they are to Trump and any Trump supporters. We've seen Facebook and Twitter censor us. We've seen so much happen. I mean, it's just crazy obvious at this point. They're brazen, right? They don't care. They're just at this point, it's like, look, we're going to take over, and I don't care if you guys see it or not. You're going to be deemed irrelevant because we're not going to give you a voice. We're not going to put you on TV. We're going to censor your internet site. We're going to do everything to silence you and replace the narrative with our own. And they've been doing that. You've seen it in the most obvious ways, like MSNBC or CNN, but now you're seeing it with Fox and others. You're seeing that that slow silencing and strangulation of the right, the Trump right, I'll call it, because let's face it, the traditional Republicans are so milquetoast weak. You know, they haven't done anything for us in ages. I mean, who's our, Mitt Romney, right? McCain. Look, as history looks at them now, it's just like, oh man, what horrible choices. I mean, they might as well be Democrats, right? But anyway, let me get back to the basics. So we're pushing these things through the courts, trying to get to the Supreme Court. There's all kinds of fraud that people are recognizing and talking about and addressing to their Congress people in hearings. That's a little bit aside of the court process. So the idea, again, is to get it in front of the public because, the popular media is not going to do it. They're insisting that Biden is the winner, and they're naming off his whole team and everything else, which, what a horror. I mean, just a group of hardcore idiots. That's what they are. These guys have been just feasting on our tax dollars for decades and decades and doing nothing good for us at all. But anyway, the press is trying to make the point that, except these people, this is how it's going to go. And, so it's up to Giuliani and really Powell also, probably especially Sidney Powell at this point, to make these extraordinary claims and lay out the cases so that people can get accustomed to this, because it's kind of shocking, which is weird because, it wasn't shocking at all for the left to accept the idea that Trump, had committed these bizarre acts, in the dossier, and he was a puppet of Putin, and Putin hacked the election and all that. I mean, all the left accepted that, no problem. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So how are they going to react when they suddenly find out that, because we've known for a long time none of that's true. But how are they going to accept it when they find out that it was their side that's been misleading them? It's their side that did all the cheating. It's their side that is in deep, deep trouble. How are they going to react? So, a lot of these cases and the information coming out, as crazy as it sounds, it's coming out to prepare us, because when we get hit with the real information, when the Kraken is released on the Supreme Court, it's going to be stunning. From everything I've heard, this is deep, 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 deep. To the point where, Trump has had so much pushback ever since he got in office, from right there in the White House even. I mean, there's people who are, they're technocrats, they're bureaucrats that just have been appointed and they exist. No one voted for them, but they've worked their way up for whatever reason, and they'll be there through multiple presidencies. They're just there because that's their job. And I think a lot of them have really taken to the power that comes with those positions. And that power is more important than party. And when Trump got in there and he basically was starting to rip away that power structure from the old Washington group, he wasn't listening to their lobbyists. He wasn't listening to them. He wasn't leaking to them. He wasn't giving them anything. They were losing relevance. And so they've been fighting back against Trump, even though they act like they're on his team. They're not. And, certainly you can see that with the head of the FBI, the CIA, and maybe even the Department of Justice. It's hard to say at this point. Who's your friend, right? These people, they have deep connections to each other, and Trump's an outsider. And so are we. If you're a Trump supporter, they don't represent us. And they don't represent the people they claim to, if they claim to represent the left. They don't represent Democrats. They represent the hard left, which is just a government elite. These aren't, I don't even think you could classify them as Americans. Really. It's just they're sort of a group, a little government all amongst themselves that that tries to kind of steer the wheel from behind. So, like I said, this case has to be made carefully, but it's going to take time. And everyone's screaming and yelling that, we've got till the middle of December, and that's it. And so, no, this is probably going to take longer. We'll hear about bits and pieces of it. You'll hear about more and more, but it's a big, big deal. And it's going to take months, I would imagine, to take this all apart, to disassemble it, to prove these cases, because there's so many people involved and multiple countries. We know at this point, the servers that were seized, and they were. We've got multiple people telling us now that servers were seized in Germany, in Frankfurt. People did die in the effort, good guys and bad guys. People are in custody. Servers are in our hands. The Kraken is the 305, the 305th Battalion, and they specialize in this kind of stuff, and they're the ones giving Sidney Powell the information. And they'll be the ones who are on deck when it hits the Supreme Court. They're the expert witnesses. But this was a big deal, the server farm in Germany, but also server in Syria and in Canada, from what I understand now. And, obviously those are foreign countries. And that there's a huge implication that comes out of that. And, you've probably heard that Trump had signed into effect a special directive to look out for foreign bad actors leading up to the election. Again, more evidence that this was all anticipated. And a lot of changes in offices. Again, like I said, people at the higher end of some of these structures, the Department of Defense, down at the Pentagon, some seats changed, some advisory panels have changed. You're seeing a lot of changes take place that, for people who've been paying attention to who these people are and how they got to their positions, is not a huge surprise, because they're obviously standing in the way of justice. They're probably helping facilitate a lot of the fraud, and that's a sad thing to even consider, But I don't know. It's been so long that we've been taught to doubt our government, to doubt the media, and here it is. We're starting to see the evidence of how bad it has become. And the more of that evidence you see, the more you realize, boy, this is going to be tough. It's like some of those weeds, you can just pull them and they'll grow back. You got to dig down and pull out the roots and the whole system, and it's going to be very disruptive to this country. The election's almost inconsequential at this point, because I can't even imagine how they're going to be able to remedy it. So it'll turn into something else. It'll probably come down to the point where the House will decide. There's a bunch of different possible ways it could go, but the thing I don't even know how to mix into the punch is the whole military angle, because the people involved in grabbing the server and doing the research, the 305th is, they can access everything. Bank records, telephone records, all that. I mean, they're deep, deep, deep. And they've probably been tracking these folks for a long time, so there's going to be great evidence. But it all has to be brought out. People have to see it. You have to weed through that whole thing. And it's just going to become more and more obvious that everyone associated with the Biden team is corrupt to the core. And, there's just nothing there to salvage. So although we had an election, what we really had was a upheaval. And what comes next? As I said, we're working through the courts. You've got Rudy doing the basic ballot stuffing and all that. You've got Sidney Powell and her whole group independently working, pushing the fraud from an individual point of view, maybe military point of view. I'm not sure how that all shapes up, but they're all trying to get to the Supreme Court level because that's the only serious court. For something like this, I mean, this has to be put out there at the end of the line because it's going to be so stunning. And I don't know what the reaction will be with our fellow citizens. People are very worried. Well, you look how violent these Antifa people are and some of the BLM people and all that. And they are, but there's not that many of them. And, I've noticed that a lot of MS-13 people have been rounded up recently, and there's been a lot of busts in interesting places that, maybe taking some of the outside help out of the equation. We'll see. There's been a big lead up to this. And I believe there's foreign powers that have been very involved in setting things up ahead of time to try to help this upheaval from the Democrat leftist point of view. And I shouldn't even say Democrat because most Democrats I know are liberal, and I love those people. But these are beyond progressives. They're just leftists. They're communists. They work for China. They work for Russia. They work for people who hate us. So, what are these people going to do? There's, like I said, there's not enough of them. They're in big cities, and they're well known. All around the big cities are regular Americans who are heavily armed and know how to use their weapons. And I'm sure none of them want to use them against other citizens, but the point is that they'd be waking up a sleeping giant that they would hate to see the reaction from because it's going to be all bad for them. But there's going to be trouble. I don't know how we could ever avoid it. So just be prepared for that. How far does it go? I don't know. Obviously the good guys were prepared also. And, as an interesting aside, I notice how the military is going to help distribute the vaccine, the logistics. So maybe that explains some of the thought process behind dealing with the angry folks. So we'll see. And I won't even go into the virus this time, other than to say that it was over a long time ago. But that's where we're at now. It's exciting and it's horrifying. But keep a close eye. Trump's going to be president next year. And unhappy people are going to be all over the place. And, the same people have been giving us a hard time, and same people that own beepers. So that means it's time for me to be quiet. But hold on your hats. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.